Hi, welcome to the Portfolio Engineering channel. My name is Paul, and today I am talking about building a portfolio operating system for active retail traders. I'm building it in public and providing it for free. So let me start talking about, let's get into what today is all about. So I'm going to be talking about the vision, the features, the minimum viable product, and the roadmap for the portfolio operating system. Before I get into that, I'm going to give a little bit of context about this mind mapping exercise that I just completed earlier, a week ago, and published in the middle of the week. And then we'll get into what is the vision, which is our North Star for the product, talk about features, talk about what is a minimum viable product, or really version 1.0, and then what's the roadmap to what's going to come next. So from a context perspective, if I implemented this mind mapping, or I executed this mind mapping exercise. And the idea with mind mapping is that you have a bunch of different ideas and you want to get them down, and then you want to iterate and go into a little bit of detail. One idea spawns another idea, and eventually you kind of get to like a good or a point of diminishing returns, or a good level of understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. And so that's what I did in that video, and I highly recommend that you give a look at it. Mind mapping is a really powerful tool, and it's good stuff. Just to give you a sense of what it looks like, here is a little bit of a snippet of when the mind mapping was actually being done. So again, that video is up there on the channel. All right, so coming from this, okay, so that's what we did. So that's what happened in the past. So let's go into the vision of what the portfolio operating system is going to be. So the idea here is we want to build an application, this portfolio operating system, that is going to transform these independent little disconnected trades that we're all doing all day long into a disciplined, data-driven operating business. And it might feel a little grandiose to talk about little retail traders like us becoming like an operating business. But if we have good tooling that supports us, and look at all the benefits that a business has. If we can unify portfolio management, we can with journaling and our trading, get good analytics, get a view into the future through accurate forecasting, do all of that without going into crazy risk levels, and then sprinkle some AI on top of it, then that's going to help us be better at making decisions. It's going to help us manage the capital that we have a lot better and more intelligently, and we're just going to end up continually improving what we're doing. And you can kind of see the little tagline: every successful business has an operating system, and every serious investor should too. So we might think of ourselves as hobbyists and amateurs, but also we're pretty serious. We're putting our money on the line. Okay, so how did I get to a feature list? And that's really where I was trying to go for. So we have this big spaghetti monster of a mind map on the left, and out of this, I spent some time to organize it into these buckets of functionality. And so I'll go into each of these in a little bit of detail, but we have data foundations and portfolio intelligence and decision support. So these are the big buckets across the top, and some of the key features that we want to build that are under those buckets. So if we go into data foundations, we'll start off with that. Everything follows from the data. So we need to get the data. And what do we need from data? Well, there's a couple of things. One that's not obvious, which is that we need to support multi-user access to the environment. And there are two kinds of multi-users. There's the multi-user scenario of, say, a husband and wife, right? My wife is not a trader, but I want her to be able to go in and view what's going on with the portfolio. So I want to support the idea of multiple people being able to go in, potentially with different levels of access. Also, we're going to have, when this solution is built, there'll be the option to deploy it, on a desktop computer at home or a laptop. But a lot of people probably won't want to go to that trouble. And if they have access to a version of this in the cloud, then that's great for them. But we need to, on the cloud side, be able to separate people out from each other. So that's another angle to this. And I a little bit hesitate to jump into doing this right out of the gate. But if we don't do it right away, then it's a much harder and error prone to do it later on. The other parts of data foundations are two really important things: the transactions and the orders. So a transaction is basically just a ledger of what happened. So you buy a stock, there'll be an entry in the ledger. You sell a stock, there's an entry. You pay margin interest, there's an entry. You get a dividend payout or interest, or all of these things are just individual entries in the ledger, and they're not connected to anything. So they're just a collection of things, and it's really vital information. Orders, on the other hand, tie all of it together. So particularly if you have like a multi-legged order, which is really common with options where you do a buy right, so you buy stock and you sell an option, those things will be paired together, and you want that pairing available to you for certain kinds of reports. And then at the statement level, so there's information at the statement level where you can see from month to month to month your NAV, just like how your net account value changes, how your margin utilization, and other information that you want to capture. And so it's kind of like a rekeying thing. We'll get the statement and we'll key that information into the portfolio operating system, and then that's going to help us get in and give us some intelligence into how our portfolio and the health of it. We're going to leverage things like broker APIs to retrieve the data. Not all brokers are equal, so we're going to need to build in a way to account for that. Some brokers don't provide APIs, some just provide spreadsheets. Some brokers provide very rich APIs, and some provide rudimentary APIs. Another aspect to data and how are we doing data intake is we want to account for multi-broker scenarios. So I have accounts with E-Trade and Fidelity and iBroker. I want to be able to view all of those. I don't want to have multiple distinct separate versions of the app or something like that. I want to have a nice little selector that says, pull up my Fidelity one, pull up my E-Trade one, and that kind of thing. So we need to be able to manage the idea of multiple brokers associated with it. And then we're going to want to get some market data probably. That implies reaching out and pulling APIs or leveraging APIs and data sources that are outside of your broker, so third parties that we'll want to look at. And so we'll use that for market data and for historical data, and probably other APIs potentially as well. So those are the data foundations, and we call it foundations because nothing can really happen until we have a handle on these issues here. Once we have the data, then we can start getting some intel. We can start extracting intelligence from our portfolio. So we can see our current positions. Now, I'm not looking at rebuilding what the broker gives us. The broker gives us like, oh, you own 100 shares of NVIDIA and you bought it at this price. Well, we want to also supplement that with other information. So we want to be able to say, okay, I bought at this price, but I collected some dividends. I sold some calls. So I have as I was doing that, I was reducing the cost basis for those shares. So we want to see like sort of the economic view, not just the mark-to-market view, they would call that. Also, we want to be able to measure our performance there. So like I projected, and I want to be able to do a projection, a weekly cash flow projection, where I can say that I expect to make X amount of dollars per stock over the course of a week or over the course of a month. And so this current positions view would also show, how are you on track with your projections, that kind of thing. So this is the kind of portfolio intelligence and the basis for being able to make good grounded decisions in what you do next. And then that's where decision support comes in. And this is where one of the most important parts of the portfolio operating system will be, is helping you make decisions. Now, when you first start, you maybe only have a couple stocks, and you go to your portfolio, your broker page, and it shows 3 or 5 stocks, right? And maybe an option or a couple options for each one of those. And that you can reason about that. You don't have a lot on your plate. But when you get to a certain level, I'm not the biggest by far, but I have about 40, 45 stocks at any given time, 100 to 150 options at any time. That is too much for me to keep in my head. And so the idea with decision support is that it's going to help me focus on what is the most important thing for me to be doing right now, and for whatever task I have in mind. So it starts with screening. There are a lot of stocks out there in the world. I have a particular strategy that I follow. I want the system to help me find those stocks. I don't want to just henpeck my way through a big long list of stocks. I want the system to say, hey, this is what you should be looking at right now. Your portfolio has these stocks right now for diversification purposes, or for unique circumstances because it's really cheap at the moment or whatever. These are good ideas. You should look at this and dig into it and make a decision on this, as opposed to some other thing which is clearly not a good idea at the moment. Role assessment is another one. So like I said, I'm gonna have 120 options at the moment, and I typically roll these things. And a roll is just buying back a call and selling a new call for further, typically usually out a week or whatever, the way I do it. And when you have that many, you have 120 of them, you you want the system to help you decide, right? You want it to show you the most important, the most valuable roles that you can do right now. What's the most impactful thing I can do right now? Another thing is around taxes, right? There are multiple ways of looking at taxes. There's quarterly taxes, so it would be nice if the system would help us estimate what our quarterly tax payment is. Not very hard to do if you have the data that we just talked about. Another thing is we'd like it to help us manage wash sales. Brokers are terrible at both these things. They don't give you quarterly tax estimations and they don't help you manage wash sales. They might indicate that you have wash sales outstanding, like E-Trade does for sure, but what do you do about it? So part of it is we'd like the system to help us decide, like alert us to the fact of these wash sales in the first place, and then give us a strategy for disposing of them. And wash sales and what you do about them will also have something to do with your taxes because you might be perfectly happy to allow a wash sale to extend out to the next year, or you might want to try to realize the loss on a wash sale this year. I'll talk about wash sales in a separate thing. You don't need to worry about them, but this for the purpose of this call, or this call for this recording. But it's an interesting topic. Okay, so anyway, you can see these decision support is really probably the most important aspect of this whole thing. But an experimentation framework. So it's another really important one. So as we're living in the world, we're going to notice things. We'll notice things about our own behavior. We'll notice things about the portfolio. We'll notice things in the news, or we'll notice things like on Reddit. Like I'm on Reddit quite a lot. And people say, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. Or you've observed, like for instance, I observed a few weeks back that this company Documentum, if I want to buy back a call on Monday, even if it's at the money, it's really expensive to buy it back. And it stays expensive practically until Friday, even if it's at the money. And if you don't know what that means, it doesn't really matter. It's just that it's a thing that I observed. And so I said, okay, I'm going to sit on my hands on Mondays. Now, prior to that, I would always kind of jump into Monday morning and go crazy with the market and do a bunch of stuff and earn a lot of premium. But I came to realize that I was being really inefficient, at least as far as Documentum was concerned, because it's actually not smart to do that roll early. And it has to do with a thing called theta and blah, blah, blah. So I put together a little experiment and I said, well, what happens if I sit on my hands on everything on Monday? What happens if I do that? And then it turned into sitting on my hands on Tuesday. So now I mostly stopped rolling on Mondays and Tuesdays. And coming out of that, I now have a vibe level understanding that it's a good idea. But really, we need to prove this to ourselves. And so that's what we need in an experimentation framework. We need to be able to define what our experiment is. Then we have to execute on the experiment and measure the results. That's really important, is measuring the results. If we can measure the results, then we can analyze them and we can learn from it. And that's the key. Because if we can learn from it, then we can take those lessons learned and become better the next week and the next week and the next week. So that's what we want to have an experimentation framework built into the portfolio operating system. Another big one is journaling. Journaling is, I have this sense that when people talk about journaling, and I don't know how other people actually journal, it's something I need to probably research a bit, but they tend to think of it as, okay, these are the trades that I made, and maybe they have a little statement about why they made that trade. The way I journal, it's more of a dear diary. Today I did this and I did this, and this is why I did it, and I'm really afraid that I made this mistake or whatever. So it's a very narrative-rich kind of journal that I do. And what you can do is you can give a journal like that, this kind of very kind of, poorly written, disjointed series of sentences and ideas to an AI, and like Gemini, like Microsoft Copilot, like ChatGPT, and it will actually give you a good ordered review of what you did and ask you probing questions. And I've gotten some really great ideas, both ideas for improving the app that I use currently, and also just like ideas to new potential experiments for the future. So the journaling concept is one of the best ways that you can leverage AI to give you good, consistent feedback on how you're actually operating. part of the journaling exercise is the hard data too. So we want to have a journal that can both like inject, you know, the current state of the portfolio along with that narrative. So when we give it to the AI, it has access to both those things. So really important stuff, journaling, cornerstone capability of the app. As you see, not an MVP, or maybe it was an MVP. I think it is an MVP, yeah. Okay, well, we'll get to that in a minute. All right, lastly, not lastly, but getting there is automation. So why do we care about automation? So there are certain things that you just got to automate to get to help you feed into your data foundations, and one of them is daily snapshots. There's a lot of interesting math and analysis that you can do on your portfolio if you know what your positions were at the end of every workday, every market day. You can know max drawdowns. There's a thing there where you can compare uh, your performance against risk-free returns that will give you a notion of how you're performing if you didn't do any of this, if you just invested in an index fund, for example. So these kinds of calculations are really interesting, and they're impossible if all you have is today's snapshot and a quarterly statement or a monthly statement. So daily snapshots and automating the capture of daily snapshots is a big deal. Another thing would be alerts and notifications. So not replacing again alerts that your broker gives you, but notifying you if you're breaking a rule. So let's say you go in, you do a trade, and and then later on you load your orders into the system. You can have the AI look at those things, look at your rules that you documented for yourself, and tell you if you broke a rule or not. So it's a little bit of an after the fact slap on the hand, but at least gives you some feedback that you don't have to keep track of in your own head. Order placement is a little bit of a weird one because broker UIs allow us to place orders, but this has to do more with more sophisticated order placement. Let's say that you know that you're willing to buy a stock at $100 a share, and the current, the bid-ask spread is $95 to $105. Well, you could use the system to try to get the lowest possible price and place an order for a low price. If it doesn't get accepted, cancel the order and place it for a slightly higher price. Wait a minute, doesn't get accepted, do it again for a slightly higher price until you either get the price you want or you can't get the price you want at the moment and you just give up. So you can do that manually. I do it manually all the time, but it's very time consuming and annoying. So we can get a system to do that for us and probably do it better and faster for us. So these kinds of things. So that's where automation comes into play. And then lastly, cash management. How many sushi dinners can I extract out of this system? How much cash can I take out without damaging the engine? Or, more seriously, like, can I pay my mortgage with this? If I was to retire today and I don't have access to retirement funds for 10 years, will my engine survive that long? That kind of thing. Getting a view into, when you do withdraw money, like making a note of why did you do that withdrawal? What was the importance of that? Understanding what your deposits are. You have to be able to separate deposits out from other kinds of things, or else it'll skew the other kinds of calculations that you're trying to do when it comes to performance. Another big one is around tax planning. I think we already talked about that. And then really ultimately what we're trying to get to is freedom, right? Is how much closer are we to not having to work that 9 to 5 job, right? How are we tracking to that? So that's a big part of what cash management is. Because at the end of the day, you need money coming out of the system to pay your bills. And if you can do that and pay for your vacations and your sushi dinners, if you can do that, and you can do that consistently, then you're free. And that's where that's the ultimate measure of success of this whole thing. All right. So we've got all of these things. We can't just take this gigantic long list of features and immediately turn that into a product. We need to do it in a phased approach. And the way that we do that is through this concept of a minimum viable product, which is what's the least amount of work that we can do to get something useful. And so I took a stab at that, and what I came up with are the ones that are highlighted in blue here. And this sort of gets into the old joke of how do you eat an elephant. Yeah, eat an elephant one bite at a time. So what we'll do is we'll talk about on the data foundations. We'll just go through each one of these things here, and work on them. So what are we going to do from a next steps perspective to get to that MVP, the highlighted in blue one? So one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to go through a data modeling exercise. We're going to create what we call a canonical model, or canonical data model, which is sort of an idealized version of what a transaction is, what an order is, what a statement is, in terms of databases, database tables, and columns and that kind of thing. And the reason we do that is it gives us isolation from the different brokers, which is one of the key things that we want to be able to do is support multiple brokers. So if we have that canonical model, it isolates us from the weirdness and the vagaries of different brokers. We want to be able to generate test data. So that's what the data generation is. So the idea is, especially in the early phases of the project, we need to be able to generate a portfolio. We won't have a broker API implemented necessarily immediately after we get that canonical model. So what we can do is we can generate fake data, do it in a repeatable way so that the same fake data is generated over and over again. And then we can start showing current positions on a UI, and we can say, okay, we know that the UI is working and it's doing the math right and showing all the things that we care about. We'll get into doing some of the performance stuff. So showing how are we doing over time, and then we'll pick a broker API to work on. And in the course of building that, we're going to build that out in such a way that we are again isolated from the broker. So we'll have basically an E-Trade broker API, a Charles Schwab broker interface API. Those APIs are going to basically reach out to the broker, get the data, and map that into that canonical data model. Journaling, I think journaling is one of the greatest strengths that portfolio operating system can provide because it's one of the best systems for helping us learn. And so we're going to do that, and then just broadly, we'll start getting into the decision support components, which will be role assessment, which is a big deal for me, and AI analysis of potential decisions or our portfolio to help us understand where we're at. And we'll also do some playbooks and handbooks. So that's the roadmap. That's where we're headed next. So thank you very much. I hope you got something useful out of this video. I'm looking forward to talking about the next one, and I'll see you there.